Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about kind of just the context of if you're doing a corporate restructuring or some type of big changes at your organization. And sometimes in the context of those big changes, something happens with an employee that's being impacted by that change. So perhaps they make a complaint, they go out on leave, something happens in the HR realm of things. Well, now what? What do you do as an organization? Do you still move forward with those changes? Do you have to look at them differently? What now, right? So what are some things that organizations should think about when they run into these types of issues, Russell?
Yeah, well, so to start, the laws exist to protect employees, against discrimination, against retaliation, on down the list. However, what can happen, and what you're kind of alluding to, is a scenario where the company has a plan to take what would be considered an adverse action against the employee, whether it's reduction of pay or termination or reassignment to a less desirable job, because of corporate reasons, larger reasons, strategic planning reasons, whatever it may be. But then the employee, before after that decision has been made, but before it's been implemented, the employee raises a question, raises a complaint, something that would entitle them to certain protection. And that can create a really dicey scenario for an employee or employer, because you want to go forward with the business decision that's been made in a manner that is not discriminatory, not retaliatory. But now the timing's bad. The optics are bad. It's not going to look right because, this problem just came up, but the decision was made previously. So, as a starting point, I mean, there's no way to just wipe out all that risk. The optics do present a risk and you have to deal with it. But as a starting point, having good documentation of those plans as early as possible is, a key piece of evidence, a key fact that can help an employer say, look, like, this decision was already made. It wasn't implemented, but it was already made, and it was, finalized. But, we were going to do this, effective January 1st. We were going to make this change, and we decided that in September. And, we just hadn't done it yet because we were playing out the string.
And some other things to consider as well is looking at who's involved in the decision making as well, right? So sometimes there's a complaint against someone, but you have a way of establishing that that person who the complaint was against has not been involved in the decision-making process at all, right? Even if they maybe would have otherwise, but they just haven't been involved or they weren't previously involved. So that's another factor as well. I know some companies also will get external consultants involved in restructuring. And so just looking at all those types of things, it's like, okay, well, who made the decision? When did they make it? What do we have to establish that that decision was made prior to this event? And I think it's just really important to think those things through and not just assume that you can't make the decision and continue to move forward just because this event has happened. But you also want to be mindful of them. And as you mentioned, Russell, you can't completely eliminate the risk. So you want to make sure that before you act, that you do what you can, both from a legal perspective to make sure you're protected and look backwards, look at what you have, gather information, but also from a practical perspective around optics and how do you now announce this? Maybe you're going to change the way you announce it. Maybe things will be altered slightly just to also prevent any damage to morale or other things that could come into play, even if you are going to continue to move forward with your original plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's the upshot. It's just, when you make decisions and wait to implement them, it creates this gap where, these risks can come to bear. And, once that happens, you either don't go forward with your plans or you modify your plans, or you take the risk of, the potential employment claim. And, what we've been talking about is ways to kind of mitigate that risk and try to smooth that over. But, as you just said, like, nothing eliminates it. It's something we're all, as an employer, still going to have to continue to deal with. And it's a tough spot. So, I mean, maybe the best thing is to move quickly and to implement strategic plans and be decisive and have, a clear documentation around it. And I think that's about the best you can do from an employer standpoint.
Yeah, and something that's worth mentioning that's also slightly adjacent to this is laws when employees are out on leave. So that's also something to consider. So sometimes the business keeps moving, the wheels keep turning, and things change. You also obviously want to be mindful of employees that you might be shuffling around while they're on leave. It's not as cut and dry as just saying, well, we can't do that. Someone's out on leave and we can't touch their position. It's not quite that cut and dry. We won't go too far into the minutia here, but definitely can be thoughtful on those approaches as well. And so, something that's kind of adjacent to this as well, that can be a consideration. Well, thanks, Russell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.